Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Hi, my friend, and welcome back to Live Unrestricted. Today, we are joined by such an amazing guest, Jenny Janov. Jenny is a pediatric dietitian who has worked with families for over 15 years, helping educate parents on healthy eating for kids while making it fun. Jenny believes all foods have a place. Foods nourish not only your body, but also your mind and your spirit. She takes a non-diet approach and focuses on intuitive eating and building a healthy relationship with food so that kids feel empowered to make food choices for themselves. If you're someone who struggles with picky eaters or you feel like mealtime is a war zone in your family, this episode is for you because you are going to learn what constitutes a family meal and why family meals are so important for your kids' development, what kind of table etiquette to model for your kids, and the importance of your language around food. Ways you can help your kids establish a positive relationship with food at an early age while still taking care of their health and caring about nutrition. What about desserts? How to communicate the value of food to your kids without labeling them as good or bad. How to handle picky eaters. We're also going to talk about ways to reduce the stress and pressure of meal times if your kids refuse to eat. How to introduce new foods to your kids without causing a fight, and so much more. I absolutely love this conversation because as someone who grew up in a big family and I now have lots of nieces and nephews, I know what it's like to sit down and try to get your kids to try new foods or to have that family time without getting interrupted and just trying to model that positive, healthy behavior for your kids. And so if you're someone who struggles with picky eaters and you want to have a more relaxed mealtime with your family, this is an episode for you. So let's get into our conversation with Jenny Janov.
Thanks for having me.
So I would love to jump right in and talk about something that I know that you find extremely important. And I'm sure that this is something you talk a lot in your practice. You work with kids, you mentioned, of all ages, and you work a lot with parents so that they can help form a positive relationship with food, healthy eating habits for their kids. And one thing that you talk about, and we were talking about this before, is the importance of family meals. So why don't you tell me a little bit about why this is something that you are so passionate about and what exactly does it mean to have a family meal?
Yes, I am definitely passionate about family meals. In the years that I've been working with families and kids, I started to realize that this was a very important piece and making healthy decisions for families and for your kids is sitting down and having a family meal together. And it sounds kind of crazy. And in this world that we're in now, people are coming and going and, sometimes you aren't able to meet up with your spouse and eat a meal. But I find that for kids, it's so important. They're getting so much from these meals. And again, we eat every day and we kind of take these things for granted, I find. But again, all the years working with clients and families and then having my own kids, I can see that these benefits, I can see them coming to light. Reasons why I think family meals are important they've actually studied this as well. So it's the one time a day, not always. If you have little kids, you spend a lot of time with them, but it's the time of day that you sit down with your kids and you're talking about your day. Young kids learn language skills. They learn to communicate better, sitting around the table. Older kids learn self-confidence, just being able to sit with their parents and talk through their day. So there's these skills that are completely non-nutrition related that I find very interesting, but they also can learn, through watching you, through modeling, they become more open to trying new foods for younger kids So I find that a very important piece from like a nutrition standpoint. And it's not so much you telling your kids, or parents telling their kids, like, you need to eat that, or you need to try that, or I made this great meal, you need to eat it. It's more that like they are learning by watching us, that how we react when we eat something. So you can eat something and be like, oh, this is so good, or I like the flavor of this, or this is sweet, or this is salty. And you talking about foods gives your kids like room to feel like they can talk about it and really learn how to behave around food and interaction with food. So I find that a really, really important piece. I'm trying to think of anything else.
Well, I'm very
yeah.
Well, I'm very curious. So in this fast-paced environment, and I know that most of my clients are moms, and I've had moms of 3, 4, 5 kids with kids who are in hockey and swimming lessons, and they're always on the go. So what do you see the most often, as like the dinner environment that most families are now eating in? Is it, eating in their car on the way to activities? Is it on their couch? Like, what are you seeing, and what would you like to see as like a transition?
Yeah. So for those older kids, like you're saying, like the sports and stuff, I do hear a lot from my families that they're going in the car, or mom and dad are splitting up and taking one kid someplace and another kid someplace else. Sometimes they're eating really late at night, and sometimes, it's something like a takeout meal. So there are all these different types of dynamics going on. The more concerning one for me is when I hear that, parents of like infants and toddlers don't sit and eat with their kids because they're like, oh, they're eating so early and we don't like to eat at that time, or, they're eating not what we're eating. So we just, I actually had a family tell me their kid was trying to feed them one time when they sat down and ate with them. And I'm like, well, what are you normally doing? They're like, well, I normally don't eat with them. So
Okay.
their kid, the only thing their kid knows is that their mom or dad is shoving food in their mouth. So those dynamics, I think, are the ones that are a little more concerning, because again, your kids are learning so much by watching you. So what I would like to see, infants, toddlers, parents of those type of kids sitting down and actually trying to eat a meal with their kid, whether it's exactly the same food or, some kind of meal with them. I think that's important. And for the older kids, if you are on the go, I find if you have a plan and there's some structure to the day, like, it's going to be a later day or whatnot, but there's still a plan, I think you can execute, fairly well. Like for us, I have kids in sports now too. So we'll do like a crock pot meal or something that's like kind of pre-done, or leftovers. So if we walk in the door late, we know what it is, versus like being at that sporting event and you're like, what are we going to have for dinner? And trying to figure it out on the fly. That doesn't work well, I find. So a plan, definitely.
Yeah.
And then just giving yourself some grace if like, it's going to be a crazy day or a couple of days and you can't get the meal together, fine. And I usually tell families who don't regularly eat family meals, maybe pick 1 or 2 days to start with.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes it's hard to dedicate every night to having a family meal, but if you're at least trying to have 1 or 2 days, especially on the weekends, having a meal where everyone is sitting down and like you said, like it's that piece of connection too. It's not just about our eating habits. I know for me, I was that girl who I barely ever ate with my family because I was in synchronized swimming. And so I trained every single day and I was at the pool until 8 or 9 p.m. So I would get home. It had been 2 or 3 hours since the rest of my family ate. I would eat alone, and then I would go do my homework. And it was sad. It was sad, and it makes you feel disconnected. And now when I have family dinners or I eat with my parents and you talk about your day and you've talked about what you learned, it makes you so much more connected with the people around you.
Yes.
So
totally agree.
So what you're saying is, of course, when kids get older, they're in sports, it's a little bit harder to try to do at least 1 or 2, but it's really important, especially when your kids are really young and they're learning their relationship with food. I mean, from 0 to 8 is when you're blank slate, you're learning from everything around you. And of course, like you said, like, kids don't know what is the right or wrong way. Like the right way is what they see every single day. So of course it's so important to model those right behaviors.
Right. I always crack up to like another almost non-nutrition related example is like you might be out at dinner or something and your kid gets messy and you're like, oh, wipe wipe yourself with a napkin. But like, if you aren't constantly modeling how to wipe your face with a napkin or letting them use a napkin at home, like, how are they going to know to do that in public? So all these types of etiquette and like liking food and how you feel about food and everything goes into when you sit down and eat a family meal.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point. Like, let's say that you're a parent and you're trying to teach your kids good eating etiquettes and good eating habits, or even good eating language. So you just mentioned that example of like, okay, you want to teach the kid to wipe themselves, you have to do it yourself. So
Yeah.
what are some other things, some other etiquettes that you would want to be aware of as you are teaching your kids how to eat?
Some other things. So the napkin one is good. I think like parents also, we go through these motions and we expect our kids to just know what to do, right? But they don't. So maybe perhaps like eating with your mouth open and talking, like you want your kid to learn that. You don't want to correct them. That's called like corrective behavior. You want to be, again, everything I think comes down to modeling. So you want to model that behavior of like not eating with your mouth full and like, if you're not using your fork or spoon or knife, you could put it down, like how to use silverware. Like that's another thing. Like we can't just expect them to know how to use silverware. So all these things they're learning by watching us at the dinner table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that because I'm a really big advocate for mindfulness when it comes to eating, and I work with, chronic dieters who are used to barely tasting their food, barely enjoying their food, barely appreciating their food, eating very quickly. And so once I actually teach them these mindfulness practices, they start doing that with their kids. And that's what I love the most, because then their kids are starting young of, okay, you don't necessarily, I never said grace when I was young before eating, but appreciating the meal that you have in front of you and talking about, oh, what does this taste like? What does it feel like? Slowing down so that your kids see, okay, well, if my mom is eating her meal in 5 minutes, then I guess that means I should be eating my meal in 5 minutes. Practicing like putting the fork down and talking about the food and how it makes you feel and who made that food. It makes your kids appreciate it so much more. And we stop seeing food as the enemy and we start seeing it as something to be cherished and something to be loved, because that really is what it is. Like, if you constantly feel like food is this thing that you have to eat or that is like against you all the time, you are going to develop a harmful relationship with food.
Yes, I agree. And I think that family, like meal times or dinner table is a good place to, make that kind of impression on your kid, the way we talk about food, like you were saying. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, it's really nice when you can kind of get your kids to hone into their own hunger and fullness cues. If you're talking about it like, wow, I'm starting to feel really full, maybe I don't need to finish all this. Like they pick up on that kind of stuff, which I think is good versus like, oh, I ate all this, I'm going to have to go for a run now.
Yes.
Definitely avoid those kinds of negative talk around food. But I do think that the setting of the dinner table is a great way to teach them positive talk around food.
Absolutely. And I absolutely love that you say that, like teaching kids how to tune in to their hunger and fullness cues, because that's something that we get disconnected from so early on because we're distracted by what other people are telling us. You have to finish your plate. And I know for me, I used to be extremely disconnected from my hunger and fullness cues. I used to overeat and binge all the time. Now I've really honed into intuitive eating and it's not a problem. But I know for me, I will always say, like, if there's a couple of bites left on my plate and like my friend or my boyfriend or someone in my family is like, just finish it. I'm like, honestly, if I finish it, I'm not going to feel good. I'm not saying it of like, oh, like I'm going to feel so fat if I do it. It's my body is not going to feel good if I finish this meal and I eat more than what my body asked for. And so talking about it in the way that foods are going to make you feel, not the way that food is going to make you look. That is so important, especially early on.
So powerful for kids too.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And I think also as parents, we have to be conscientious that we're talking about it in the way it makes us feel and modeling that, but not putting it on our kids.
Mm-hmm.
The example of like, you have to finish your plate, like you said, or you need one more bite or two more bites before you can get down. That is not teaching our kids to understand their own hunger and fullness cues. So
Yeah.
the distinction there is really important,
Yeah.
of the modeling what we want them to do, and also not enforcing our beliefs on what they should eat.
So I have a question for you. How do you feel about people who, I know how I feel and I've seen the research, but how do you feel about parents who use desserts as this kind of reward of like, okay, well, if you finish your plate, then you can have dessert. What is your opinion on this?
I really don't like it. And I think, there is starting to become more and more research around it. I think the main premise, the reason why it's not so great is it's that whole idea of putting pressure on your kids, either positively or negatively. You're not teaching them, again, to like hone into their own hunger and fullness kinds of cues. You are teaching them that there's this really good thing out there. And if you eat this, then you can get this really good thing. And so it may motivate them to try a food that they wouldn't normally eat, but there's no guarantee that that's going to make them love that food and eat it as an adult. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories of adults who say, oh, I see peas and my parents used to make me eat them and I would like hide them. And now I just have this negative, relationship with peas. So like that can happen too. So I find it's better to keep foods as neutral as possible. Definitely don't use foods for a reward, especially desserts.
Yeah, especially that's exactly it. Trying to keep foods neutral, because that's something we see as we grow up is we start putting what I call fun foods, but what most people would call junk food. We start putting it on a pedestal. These are the special occasion foods. These are the foods I get when I deserve it or when I'm sad or when I'm emotional. We put them on a pedestal. And so, of course, when we teach our kids that, okay, you can eat all the foods that I want you to eat, so the quote unquote healthy foods, if you do that, then you get this as a reward, then of course, we're going to very early on start putting those two different foods into two different categories. And it's when you start categorizing and label foods as good and bad, then of course, your relationship with those foods is going to change and it's going to become tumultuous.
Yes, completely agreed.
Mm-hmm. And so how would you advise a parent to talk about healthy? Of course, we're all using big quotation marks here, but like healthy and unhealthy, or like those play foods. How should we talk about them so that kids can learn to want to eat those foods that make you feel good, that make you grow, that make you strong, that give you energy? Because of course, like as much as I advocate for eating all foods, if you were to just feed your kids chips and chocolate all day long, they wouldn't feel great. And I really do believe that it has to come from them. They want to be making those choices. They want to like how it makes them feel. So how do you talk about that without talking about food in terms of good and bad?
Yes. So I try to talk a lot about what foods give us. And so my husband's gotten really good about this too. Like if my kids are eating, they have like meat on their plate, we're like, oh, that's really good for your muscles. Or if they have some milk, you can talk about it being good for their bones. You can kind of talk about how foods, the kinds of different positives.
It makes them, yeah.
Yeah, how it can benefit them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't usually talk about the negatives of foods necessarily, but like for sweets, we just came off of Halloween. So sometimes we'll talk about like candy is okay, and candy can give you energy because it's basically an energy food. But what happens with it, it doesn't have a lot else in it. So maybe it'll give you lots of energy and then you won't feel so good. You'll feel really tired. And then you'll be hungry again. So sometimes we want something that's going to be a little more filling than that. So you can talk about it. Like I like to talk again about candy as being like a quick energy food versus something that's going to give you energy for longer. So we'll talk about foods that have protein or fat or fiber in them, and this will keep you full longer. And even my like 4 and 7-year-old can grasp those kinds of concepts. So I like really encourage parents to talk about, again, benefits of some of the foods, not necessarily just negatives or why. You can't really say that that's bad or that's good. You have to give kids some reasoning behind it. So I think your messaging has to be really clear on the why versus just labeling it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love to talk about to my clients. Let's talk about how the foods make you feel. Again, how they make you feel, because when you start making those connections, I know for me personally, fried food, as much as I love a good mozzarella stick or fried pickle, it gives me the worst stomach aches and it really does not make me feel good. And so I know that I can make that decision. I can, absolutely. I have full permission to eat those foods whenever I want. I don't feel bad about it. But do I really want to make myself feel that way? Most of the time, the answer is no.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Good learning experience too for your kids sometimes is if they eat away and you notice that they're feeling like kind of bad, like you can kind of talk to them about that as well. And I think that kids are really receptive to that.
Absolutely. So we all know those families or those kids where family meals are like a war zone, where the kids don't want to eat anything. I personally don't have kids, but I know that my sister has a lot of friends who every time they go to try to feed their daughter, their son, they're just nervous because are they going to eat this food? Are they going to freak out? So if we have a mom or a dad who feels like, yeah, this all sounds really great, but my kid doesn't want to eat anything, and it's always a fight to get them to eat the meals that we make, what is your advice there?
So this is a very like layered question. I definitely have all my clients that I work with who have some difficulty around eating, or mealtime battles, I like to call them, or picky eaters. A few things that I have them institute first, because you really have to lay the groundwork here. So the first being is having some structure to your day. Like if your kid can just come and eat whenever they want, go to the pantry, grab a snack, get stuff out of the fridge, there's no scarcity there. They think they can, if they miss a meal, who cares? Like they don't care. So there needs to be some sort of structure around the day so that there's another dietitian who talks about like the kitchen's open, the kitchen's closed, like your kids can only eat at certain times. And so once you kind of get into that rhythm of that, some, at least a loose structure of like when is an eating time and when's not an eating time, then your kids will, they're start to think about, I'm not going to be able to eat again until this time. So that does help. And then
can I ask you something about that? My only concern there when I hear that is what if they get in that mindset of, okay, this is my only time to eat for another 3 or 4 hours, so I should overeat out of fear of not getting hungry again.
True. So there is that opposite that can happen too. So I say for those kinds of kids, there's still like a time to eat, but parents are usually setting out the like reasonable portions. So it isn't just keep going back up and eating as much as you want. It's like eat your reasonable portion. And with my older kids, I talk to them a lot about like, why don't you think about if you're still hungry or still full? Like you can ask your parents for seconds, but like, are you actually hungry? Mm-hmm. Is it just that you're not going to eat again for a few hours or till the morning? Yeah. Think about your hunger and fullness. So I really try and get those kinds of kids to really think about why they are wanting to keep eating.
And I think you can start knowing your kids. And if your kid comes up to you and says, Mom, like I'm really hungry right now and I don't want to wait until dinner, you're going to start to understand that. And I think I just wanted to make sure that there is a delineation there of, kitchen's open, kitchen's closed. But if they come to you and they say, I'm really hungry, of course, go ahead and have that food. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to limit the mindless, habitual snacking that goes on throughout the day is what you're saying.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, because I will say that kids go through growth spurts and slowdowns, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you do start noticing that your kid is really, really, really hungry after school, or like at a certain time every day, like maybe they need to have a bigger snack. Maybe they need to have a bigger lunch. Mm-hmm. And yes, certainly you can feed them if you're like, okay, they are just really starving.
Yeah.
And I certainly have times where we're running from one place to the other and I forget to give them the snack. And then they get home at 4:35 and they're starving. And I dropped the ball. I didn't give them their snack and it's going to be dinner time. Like, of course I'm going to give them a snack.
Yeah.
Definitely there's like some gray
So
areas, but
yeah,
I
so
find
there's definitely
that
using logic and flexibility there in terms of adapting to where your child is at that time.
right. But I will say for the families that like have no structure, like there's no way you're going to be able to get your kid to come to the dinner table and start eating variety and eating things you're making if they have just been able to eat whatever they want all day. So it is a starting place for sure. So that's the first thing. And the next big thing I tell families is like, you have to take the pressure and anxiety off. Like
Okay.
they feel that. Like you can't be pressuring them. They don't want to sit at the table with you pressuring them to eat or trying to bribe them to eat. Like they need to come to the dinner table feeling safe and confident and just wanting to be there, any age they are. And so, and I also think lowering your anxiety around what they're going to eat, if they're going to eat too much, if they're not going to eat, like you have to just kind of let some of that go at the table around your kids.
So how do you let go of that? Like practically, how do you let go of that stress and anxiety?
I try to, this is again, one of the first things I do with families. And then we talk about strategies to like make sure that they're getting the nutrition they need. But I kind of a lot of like self-talk with them, right? Like your kid, for one thing, is not going to starve if they go to bed hungry at dinner. They are not going to starve. So just like trying to like ingrain that, I think is really important because it's hard. I usually try to set up some sort of structure around for parents so that they feel a little bit more confident, but sitting there fighting with your kid at the dinner table, you're especially young kids who are really craving that control, you're going to get nowhere.
Yeah.
So you really do have to let it go, but have some other things in your back pocket. So for young kids, I tell the parents, they leave the dinner table, they have a certain amount of time to eat. Maybe you play a game, maybe they do homework, maybe they take a bath. You can have another eating opportunity. You can have a snack before bed. So that's like what's
Mhm.
in your back pocket that like you're like, they're gonna have a snack. Like it's not gonna be the end of the world.
Yeah.
Um, the
I
other
know
thing
I know one of my nephews is an extremely picky eater, and he's the one who we put a plate in front of him and he won't even taste it. He'll just start crying and says he doesn't want it. And my brother often tries to like push him and let's just have one bite. And I always think if he when he gets really, really hungry, he's gonna eat. And the more pressure, and like you said, the more pressure and the more you try to push them, like as of 2 years, they just want to be autonomous. They want to show their independence. And so if you let them be, and I feel like on sometimes you just have to let them be in a corner with their food. They've got nothing else to do. So when they're hungry, when left to their own devices, they will eat. And maybe they won't eat that food, but they will eat something.
something, yes. And to that point, yeah. So the one more, I already mentioned this, like the one more bite, like that can kind of put that extra pressure on them. Like they can become like really fearful around food and eating and meal times. And so I think you're not going to get anywhere again with your kids if they are scared about eating or they're stressed about eating. So you really want to get them coming to the table in like a neutral way or a happy way. So that's why I'm like, I know that it's hard, but that is the first thing I try to like peel back a little bit because that's our window. Like once they feel comfortable, then you can really start to enjoy those meals and maybe they'll start eating more. The last
Yeah.
thing I would say, again, there's so many things, but the last thing is like have on the table, like they can either serve themselves family style stuff that they want to eat, or on their plate is always foods that they feel comforted by or they like. We call them safe foods. Then you can put some other foods on their plate, but give them something that you know that they tend to like and want to eat.
Okay.
Um, so that they feel a little more secure coming to the table. And don't overwhelm them with lots of options and lots of food,
Hmm.
especially toddlers. Kids want a little bit, they can have a little bit of some new foods on there, but like don't overwhelm them.
Yeah. So are you saying, so let's say you want your child to try a new food that they've never tried before, or a food that's prepared in a different way. Would you recommend to kind of sneak it in with foods that they already enjoy, and not necessarily sneak it in, but I mean pair it. Let's say you want them to try chicken and they've only eaten beef in their life. You're putting it with a side of carrots, which you know that they love, and you know that they love mashed potatoes. And then instead of putting the beef, you would try that new food that they've never tried before.
Yes, I just put it on the plate. I would just say, just try it, put it out there. Don't push or try to get them to eat it. Just see what they do. And you can interact with the food. I think that is great. Like they may ask a question. Sometimes I put tofu out. My son's like, this looks like weird chicken. I'm like, well, it's not chicken. It's kind of the same. It's a protein. You can try it and tell me what you think. So you can interact with the food, or you can eat it and be like, oh, this chicken, it tastes like a little salty, or maybe it's dry, or maybe it's moist, or like getting your kids to learn those descriptor words versus I don't like it, or I hate it, or I like it, or I don't, that, or like that is helpful to them. So you can eat it and talk about either how it makes you feel, like you're feeling kind of full. This is a lot of food, or you can talk about how it tastes.
Yeah. Yeah. So even if you personally don't think it's the best thing in the world, you can, instead of saying, oh, I don't like this or this is bad, you say, oh, it's a little bit too salty. Or I know my niece is the perfect poster child for an intuitive eater, and she will literally eat anything, and she is able to describe if something is too spicy or something is too hot. Like she has used all of those descriptive words, and I think that this kind of happened naturally. I don't think my sister was doing it on purpose, but I think that's great advice, and I never really thought of it that way, of teaching your kids to describe food, and who knows, they might even grow up to be a foodie because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Much better approach than just telling them, I gave you this new food. Will you just try it? Like that, much better.
Yeah. So I know the answer to this, but let's say they don't like the food the first time. Do you just stop trying to give it to them and say, well, they just don't like that food, so game over?
No, you definitely, especially with young kids, you want to try over and over and over. I mean, some of the studies vary on this, but anywhere from 10 to 20 tries, I think even more tries of trying a food or being exposed to a food for a kid to like it. Their taste buds are so sensitive. There's one thing I started doing, which is kind of fun, like talking about actual taste buds too. Our taste buds tell us that it tastes salty or tastes sweet, or like the way that we taste food kind of changes. So sometimes we like things more than others, and sometimes that changes. So I actually had my son, and I've only done this a little bit, but I even had my son recently be like, oh my gosh, Mom, my taste buds changed. I love radishes now. So it was funny to hear him say it that way, but like it's true. So just getting them to, depends on their age. So like an infant or like a young toddler, you may just put it out there and they're like, oh, I don't know. They pushed away. I don't like it. And you're like, it's okay. Maybe you change your mind. I just thought you might want it. Your taste, but you can just start talking about it then. And then as they get older and they're like, Mom, remember, I don't like this. Sometimes I tell my kids, well, I just thought maybe your taste buds have changed by now. My oldest one would be like, I don't think they've changed yet.
Yeah.
But have those kinds of conversations around how our likes and dislikes change over time.
Yeah, I love that. I know for me growing up, I thought sushi was the grossest thing in the world. Like no one could even force feed me to eat sushi. And there was this one time when I was 16, it was like my last day of high school, and we all went out for sushi and I tasted it and I was like, whoa, I now kind of love this. And now it's one of my favorite foods. So absolutely our taste buds can change. And I think that's what is really great about that as well, is you're teaching at a really young age to your kids that they're not fixed, even just when it comes to their taste buds. But, distinguishing between the fixed and the growth mindset is you're really teaching them that like you're going to change throughout your life. Your taste buds are going to change, your abilities, your capabilities. Because if, let's say that kid grows up and they think I'm bad at math and I'm always going to be bad at math, or I'm bad at French and I'm always going to be bad at French. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And so if you start noticing, okay, well, I know that my taste buds can change and my appreciation for food can change, then everything can change in my life. And I'm not fixed at birth, and things can grow and change. So I think that's a really good point as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love talking to families about that, just that encouragement of putting foods out there in different ways and multiple times. And that's the other thing is like, if you've offered a food a certain way, like 10 times and your kid's still not touching it, like you can present it in a different way. And sometimes that can be a little more interactive for them. Like I love the example of like using like the spiralizer. Like I've done that with like cucumbers, and I'll tell families that like your kid doesn't like cucumber sticks or slices, you've tried it, but then you make it into worms or like make it something fun and interactive for them. maybe they still won't like eat a ton of it, but they may pick it up, they may smell it, they may lick it. All that is exposure, and all of it's great.
Yeah, yeah. And I know for me growing up, I hated cucumbers, but if my mom sprinkled a little bit of salt on them,
Yeah.
game changer. I would have them all day long. So, also even pairing it, if you know that like
Yeah.
they like ranch sauce, you know that they like hummus, pair it with something that they already like. And I think that's so great. Like
Yeah.
make presenting it in a different way doesn't mean that they don't like the
Way.
food. They might just be afraid of that particular way that you presented it the first time.
Yeah. And dips are great. Like you said, dips are a great avenue for kids who like that, to
Hmm.
get them to be a little more open without you telling them you need to eat this. Like you just put
Yeah.
it out there, the dip they like.
Yeah. So to recap, the importance of having those family meals and modeling those behaviors when it comes to the way that you talk about your food, using those descriptive words, having that table etiquette of, okay, slowing down, appreciating your meal, putting your fork down, even getting your kids to tell them how the food tastes, I think could be super helpful. Not overwhelming them with a lot of new food all at once, making sure that they have those safe foods with them, and then not putting so much pressure on them, because I think the aspect of trust is so important. And especially as adults, when you've been dieting for so long, you have a really hard time trusting yourself around food. And so it can be extremely difficult to believe that you can trust your kids around them. And so knowing that you can trust your own body, that your body is always sending you signals, it's always communicating with you. And the same goes for your kids. And eventually they're going to be able to connect to, okay, this food makes me feel energized, makes me feel good, or this food doesn't make me feel so good, and I have a stomach ache after. Helping them connect to their own bodies and how different foods make them feel is the best way to help them eat intuitively at a young age, and then keep that up going into their adulthood.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you have any last final pieces of advice for any moms, dads? I know that I've got mostly moms who are listening who feel a lot of anxiety when it comes to feeding their kids or mealtime. Anything that they can walk away with?
Yeah, I would say keeping in mind some of those different strategies that I mentioned earlier, and just trying to find ways to not put that anxiety and stress onto your kids. I know that it's so, so hard.
Hmm.
Um, but there's also like, there's a lot of ways that you can like feel confident in knowing that your kids are getting what they need, either by talking to someone like me, like a pediatric dietitian, or finding different ways to add in nutrition in other parts of their diet. Like if you're really stressed about meal times, different creative ways to add in new foods. You can also be somewhat comforted, like talking to their pediatrician, talking about their growth. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're meeting all their needs, but I feel like there's certain things you can feel really confident about, and taking kind of that confidence. Like, again, if your kid is growing well, just taking a moment to just like try and remove some of that anxiety around the mealtime, so that, like you said, building that trust, once you guys have that trust and there's less stress and anxiety around meals, you can start to move forward. So
Hmm.
I know
So,
it's a
are you saying that the way that your kids eat doesn't need to be perfect?
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does not need to be perfect. This is why I start with like the structure and the family meals, and then removing the stress, because it's not so much, about exactly what they're eating at that moment. It's setting them up for those good behaviors going forward. And once you have those things in place, it is a lot easier to make changes and help from a diet and nutrition perspective. But
Yeah.
you really, really need to set those what I call like the baseline
Yeah.
strategies in place.
Yeah. And what I really like to teach my clients is the concept of zooming out. Like instead of looking at the way that your kids eat for one
Okay.
day or one meal or 1 week, even if they go a week, I've gone weeks where I've been really sick and all I've craved was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. What I like to do is imagine the totality of what your child is going to eat over a lifetime, and imagine you were to put it all on a table. That is over 80 years of eating. 1 week, 1 meal, even 1 month of only eating a specific food is not going to kill them. It's not going to send them into a nutrient deficiencies. And so when you remember that, oh my God, my kid ate Halloween candy for an entire day, like that's okay. They don't eat Halloween candy every single day, all day long. And so zoom out instead of focusing on such a minute part of their life.
That's perfect. That's such great advice.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely like try to remind parents of that too. Just
yeah. It can be hard, especially because we live in such a fear-mongering society when it comes to nutrition of if you feed your child 1 piece of candy, it's as bad as giving them a cigarette. I mean, there is so much fear-mongering.
They can't miss dinner
no.
or whatever. Yeah. So they're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And it is more looking at like the whole week or the whole month and that whole totality idea, because that bringing down that barrier, removing that stress, I find helps you move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are my comments.
Well, it was so lovely to speak with you, Jenny. I have no doubt that anyone is going to walk away if they're struggling with like stressful eating time and picky eaters. They're going to have a lot of actionable tips to take away from this. So if anyone is still confused and still struggling with picky eaters or stressful mealtime and they want to connect with you, I know that you have a new course coming up as well. So tell us everything. Where can we find you? Where can we connect with you? And of course, we're going to put all that in the show notes as well.
Great. So you can find me at eatplaythrivenutrition.com. That's my website. So getting my blog up and going again. And there's some great information on there. And you can join my newsletter if you don't want to miss out on anything. You can also find me on Instagram at eat.play.thrive.nutrition. And I am creating right now a picky eating prevention and help kind of course for families who are struggling a little bit with their really young ones around meal times. So that will be coming in January, which I'm really excited about. It hasn't launched yet. So that's the plan is of when to launch it.
Well, thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us today. This was an awesome conversation. I'm sure that my listeners got a lot out of it. And thank you to all of you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.